Hello, Sister Sunday Live coming to you. So excited to be chatting with the Enchanted Birth Keeper shortly. We'll see when she pops on here. There she is. She's coming back. She's coming back. Let's get her. Let's get her. Are you with me? I'm sending a request. We're going to work it out. Thank you for hanging in there. Yes.
Yeah. We did it.
We did it. We're the best. How are you?
Yay! I'm well. How are you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, your hair. I can never get over it. So.
Yeah, I gotta keep it out of the microphone. Try and keep it under control.
Well, thank you, lovely people, for joining us. I'm so excited to be having this conversation and be sharing time with Leticia and all of you today. I met Leticia through the Radical Birthkeeper School, and it was from the moment she started talking, she profoundly impacted me. Her wisdom and her love is so deep for humans, for this planet, and for the processes that we go through in our fragile bodies. So, Leticia, I would love to kind of just jump into how you got led to this particular place that you are now a Gentle Grief Guardian, and what did that look like for you in those first few moments as you came into that realization that this was purpose?
Yeah, so earlier, well, I guess it's not this year, we're in the next year, but last May I gave birth to my son, and he was born still. And so it was a very different experience with grief I had never experienced before, and really opened me up and allowed me to see more clearly my purpose in life as a woman, as a mother, as a sister, as a human being. And the way I was held in my grief was so beautiful by my community. And you know, as my partner and I walked through that experience, we birthed our new business, which we had been hoping to create for a while. And I remember writing kind of our mission statement on the website, and we talked about supporting our community in birth, death, and into the beyond. And we really felt that. We really, you know, were calling that in. And then 6 months later, some dear friends of ours were expecting their second baby, and at about 33 weeks, lost their baby girl, and she almost lost her life. And yeah, it was just rocked our whole world again. And not only were we holding them through their grief, we were also caring for them deeply in our home for the first week and a half of her postpartum, and caring for their young daughter during that time, their older 2-year-old daughter. really truly stepping into that role, being guardians of grief. And it was just so profound to be in that space. So
I know that we're I'm back. I want to hear
okay.
so much about what is the day-to-day. There we are. What is the day-to-day kind of practicality? Like, you have such a deep spiritual presence. Well, what is the practicality of tending for someone who just lost a baby child and almost their own life? What does that look like as a grief guardian when you take care of them?
Sure. In this particular instance, it was, meeting the basic needs to be as grounded and supported as possible in terms of warmth and food. Just, making sure they were eating, making sure they were hydrating, because, when you're so raw in early grief, you're just in shock and you just, can't really move, let alone think to feed yourself, care for yourself, and because this particular iteration of grief guardianship was dealing with a postpartum mother, we were really caring for her body and really making sure she stayed in bed and was as restful as possible. And then, just allowing space for their grief to be expressed and reminding them that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to not want to talk about it, not want to deal with it. Just basically, in the most basic sense, is meeting them exactly where they're at and really being in that energy management position of like, okay, feeling into the energetic space. What are we feeling here? Are we needing some music? Are we needing dim lights? Really trying to create a sacred sanctuary as much as possible for all feelings to be expressed and felt, and a space to talk if they want to be, or just gentle reminders of how loved they are, and offerings that came up that were helpful for myself or for my partner. Just really, again, the basics is just meeting someone exactly where they're at the best you can with whatever tools and teachings you have.
When holding space for someone through this grief process, and I know that you don't, like, you're kind of broad spectrum and that you support postpartum, of course, but as a birth keeper, but also all stages of life. And you've held for those in different places. When you're assessing kind of where they're at in their sacred journey, how do you honor it when there's so many different stages to it?
That's a great question. First is just, again, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but just really coming as best you can to meet the person with what they're in what stage of grief they're in that moment, right? Because, we have like somewhat of a structured idea to understand the basic, like these are the stages of grief. And, sometimes I know for myself, I was really in the acceptance stage to start, which isn't really typical, I think. And that's can be hard and confusing for other people. If someone just experienced this huge loss and is really like finding all these reasons of why it was meant to be, and being in acceptance and going with that and allowing that, or maybe they're really angry and they really need to express that anger, right? And allowing that, even encouraging it to be bigger, right? Like, not just really encouraging them to dig even deeper into that and to let it be fully self-expressed. And sometimes there's different practices that you can offer, like, oh, it seems like you're feeling really sad and you need a place to, but it's not like kind of moving, it's not flowing, so maybe you should take a bath, maybe you should go sit by the river, connecting elementally. The elements are always such allies in my life. Yeah, or maybe they're needing more physicality. Maybe they've been stuck in bed for 2 weeks and it's deep darkness and depression, and they're needing to get out of bed and get moving. They're needing the sunshine on their face. They're needing that fire energy to get them going. So again, just trying to come and assess the situation and understand energetically what's needed, elementally how to bring more balance and allow the energy to move, because that's what's so important about grief, is to not allow it to stagnate. And that grief can be really healing, right? When it's flowing. It's this opportunity to deepen into every aspect of life, right?
Sure.
But if you resist it, it's just going to keep coming up and it's just going to keep getting bigger. So how can we move towards it and allow it to flow with as much ease and grace?
I mean, you speak about it with this like kind of natural compassion, but it's not something that we see in existence really in this society currently. How does one start a practice to have a healthy relationship with grief?
That's such a good question. I have a book that I love to reference because it's helped me so much on my own journey with grief, and like really understanding the importance of grieving, the sacred art of grieving, and I have it right here with me, so I'll show it. It's called The Smell of Rain on Dust, and it's really beautiful. And one of my favorite authors, Martine Prechtel, and it really just, it's the smell of rain on dust, but it also says grief and praise and how they're inextricable, right? And that, the art of grieving is like honoring what we've loved and lost. And so the depth of our grief is the depth of our love, right? So not being afraid to feel all of that, right? It's like a lot of people can get really afraid, like, I can't go there because once I open those floodgates, it's just going to be torrential, right? And it's never going to stop. Exactly. Too big, too intense. Can't do it. And so really just I think also our society can get really intellectual. So maybe that's the starting point, right? Like maybe we just understand how important it is just to have this process, and we can start to open up a little bit. And then little by little, we can come to embodiment practices of allowing ourselves to feel those feelings and just noticing, oh, I have constriction in my throat, but I'm smiling. Right? And so that is incoherent. And so, wow, there's sadness that's wanting to be expressed. And how can I tap into that? Maybe I need to watch a sad movie because actually that feels a little safer to, express and get those tears flowing in that way. And then, oh my gosh, all of a sudden I'm feeling all these feelings that are buried deep inside, and I'm accessing my grief. And then little by little, and just that it's such a different process for each person, and yeah, I saw Chelsea's question over here about her feeling like her grief was repelled by so many loved ones, and it can be so hard for people to see you so vulnerable, so broken. You're cracked wide open, right? And for people who aren't willing to go there, they don't know how to hold space for that. They don't know how to meet that, right? And so that's part of it too, is finding people who can meet you there, or animals. Like that is such a safe way to have a grief guardian. They are the ultimate guardians of grief, right? Is animals, because they just meet you right where they are. They give you that love. They just hold such beautiful sacred space, and finding that guardian of grief to allow you to be seen and allow you to express, so you don't have to feel like you have to pull back on behalf of others, because it definitely can feel like that when you're in raw grief.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you. So I'm just recapitulating one of noticing where it is in our body and how it feels, even if that is congruent with the rest of our body. Finding the safety in another person, and if you can't, then finding the safety in an animal. Moving, connecting with the elements, moving towards the elements, and letting them also kind of reflect what's going back. I love all these. This is amazing. You have spoken also about how grief goes in cycles, and that the relationship with it is dynamic and kind of changes throughout the course of one's life. How do these cycles kind of move out into larger circles to help us kind of understand relationships with grief, but also just relationship?
Mm. Yeah, I think again there's like basic tenets of grief we can identify in like stages like anger, the deep sorrow or sadness, acceptance. I don't really quite know. I'm not so familiar with all the specifics, but yeah, that it's important to recognize that once you're engaged in a relationship with grief, it's across a lifetime, and then you're going to have different iterations of it with different losses, right? You know, maybe it is the loss of a dear loved one, maybe it's the loss of a pet, loss of home and place, like if you lose your
Mm.
home, if you move out of country, out of state, you lose the land that has raised you, you know, like grief comes in so many different iterations. And then once you've opened up that relationship with your first experience with grief, then every time a new relationship of grief comes along, they're stacked on top, right? And one can compound the other and such. And so just recognizing that, yeah, there are so many layers. It is so dynamic. It's constantly changing. And how we can really recognize and use all the tools we've already talked about to understand as we move through, and that when a new grief comes along, it's going to be a whole different process, and maybe we come back to something we thought we've already moved through, and then it opens up this wound so much deeper. I know for me, after the loss of my son, 5 months later, my aunt passed, and she was like a mother to me, and it just rocked me to my core. And that is when I really started to feel anger. You know, before it would come and it would go, but it wasn't really, I hadn't really fully embodied that stage, or maybe allowed myself to go there, you know, whatever have you. But that's when I got really angry, and I was like, oh, okay, this is where I'm at now. This is what I'm needing. This is the stage I'm needing to be in. Are the emotions that are needing to be expressed, and how can I allow myself to have that? And also understand too, it's not going to be forever. Like, I'm here now. Can I let it
Mm.
be fully here so that then it can dissipate and I can move forward, right? And
Yeah.
just being again in that dynamicism. If that's a word.
That forever feeling, I feel like, is the biggest. Um,
Oh.
if we can, there we go.
Yay, we're back.
Yeah.
Okay. The forever feeling is the last thing I heard.
Okay. Yeah. So um, tell me about when when we get to that place where we don't want to go there, right?
Mm.
I think we've each gotten to that place where, like, I don't want to feel this feeling, because if I feel it, I'm going to feel it forever.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give in that moment to kind of bridge that, um, the embracing of the feeling, right? So that that forever uh, barrier that we've created doesn't have to be there anymore.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. The first thing that came to mind was that, you know, maybe that's not the time to go fully into the feeling because there's resistance
Ooh,
there for whatever reason. And
sure.
maybe that's when you try some of like your shift options, you know, like I know something that's been echoed to me, reflected to me so many times was like having a list of things that bring you comfort that you can go to when you're in that dark place. You feel like it's never going to end. You feel so low, and you start going
Yeah.
down the list, you know, journaling, taking a bath, doing some movement practice, getting outside into nature, listening to your favorite song, reading a beautiful poem, you know, just whatever your tools are, whatever your list of things is, going to that and seeing if any of that can help like dissipate that intensity for at least for that moment. And then maybe seeing how you feel after. Maybe then you're ready to go back into that motion, maybe not, you know,
Yeah.
and just simply that maybe that's not the time to fully go into it. And that at the end of the day, like there's no rules, right? This is for each
Right.
of us
No right
to
ways.
just right, exactly. It's just our way, and it's I could talk to you about this whole process and hopefully it's helpful to some people, but ultimately it's a relationship and it's for each of us to discover. It's a
Yeah.
journey, and there's
Yeah.
so much beauty and so much wisdom that can be distilled from such a sacred time of being cracked right open, because that's really what it is. And just, yeah, it's been so inspiring for me to move towards that and to let it be my ally, right? And to really see my grief as my ally and this expansive experience rather than allowing me to contract. And I'll also say
Mm,
that that's not that I've never been contracted, that there aren't moments of
yeah.
contraction or periods of contraction. I'm a human being, of course, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't want to stay in that place. And sometimes I need to be, and sometimes I'm like, you know what, I'm really feeling so shitty and sorry for myself, and I just need to be here. Like, this is where
Yeah.
I'm at. I need this. I need people to take care of me. And can you ask for help too? That's like,
Yeah.
oh, such a hard one to be so humbled to ask for help when you need it. And I think especially the further along you get on your journey with grief, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, I should be here, right? There's this
Mm.
expectation. You should be past it. You should be functioning on your own. You've already had so much help. You shouldn't, just all the shoulding. And so to just shut that down as quick as you can and ask for help to be supported in those times.
Is there a timeline for grief? Is there an appropriate time to stop grieving?
Mm. Well, first off, there is no end to grief. You don't stop grieving, right? Again, it's a relationship with grief,
Right.
and it's welcoming this energy, this experience into your life. And again, you can resist it, and we often do, and that's our choice, right? That's our own journey.
Right.
But the sooner we can accept that and embrace it, the more expansive the experience can be. We can deepen our relationship not only to our sorrow but to our joy, right?
Mm.
Because when you've
Yes.
gone to those depths of sorrow and darkness and pain, then it allows you on the other side to experience joy in a way you've never seen before, to have gratitude for every single moment in a way you've never seen before. When you've danced with death, when you've met death, when you've, you know, felt your mortality and the mortality all
Mm.
around you, it
Yes.
just really paints the picture of how precious every single moment is. The colors get brighter, right? The smells get more rich, the tastes, the embodiment, right? Like every
Yeah.
little sensation is just gratitude for this human experience. And I think oftentimes too, we so often want to escape this human experience thinking it's
Yeah.
such a burden, right? And like it's the goal is to transcend and to, get away from it. But it's really about how can we be fully expressed in this human experience? How can we really enjoy all that it is? And part of that is the sorrow, is the anger, and that it's all just part of the spectrum of emotions, right? And
Amazing.
yeah, yeah, just not having expectations, to bring it back to the timeline, have not
Yeah.
having expectations for yourself. It's ongoing, it's continuous, and it's going to take different shapes and forms, and to know that all of us dance with grief at some point in our lives across our lifetimes, and having lots of grace and compassion, not only for ourselves, but for others, right? And that's
Right.
ultimately what it comes down to, is really just having so much love and compassion for all of humanity within this human experience.
For people that don't have mm, ease of relationship with grief right now, and they meet somebody who is in the middle of a more active, intense part of their grief journey,
Mm-hmm.
often they're like, I just don't know what to say, right? Like, what do I
Mm-hmm.
say? Or I don't want to remind them of it, so I just won't bring it up. So I'll just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help the peoples out with how, like, the, it, is there a time that it shouldn't be brought up? Is there some scripts or some words that you found to be useful? Does a grieving person want us to distract him, or do they want us to do something different?
Well, I'll speak from my own experience and say that There's never a timeline. It's never too late to say something, even if you feel like, oh my gosh, so much time has passed. It's been a year and I never reached out, and
Mm,
they must think I'm a horrible friend or sister or cousin or whatever. In my experience, I don't feel like there's ever a time that I wouldn't appreciate someone reaching out and saying, how are you?
mhm,
And just being as truthful and as authentic as possible. I really didn't know what to say, and so I didn't say anything, and I'm just here now saying I love you and I care about you, and I've thought of you so often, and
mm,
I
mm,
hope you're well, and just putting it in your own words, of course, but starting somewhere like that, and no matter how much time has passed, and I have appreciated those messages so much and
mm,
across the timeline, and it's helpful that they're spread out and that they're not, it actually is nice to
mm.
have them further along, because oftentimes at the beginning, there's lots of people around, there's lots of support, and then all of a sudden it gets a lot harder when more time has passed and there aren't as many phone calls, there aren't as many text messages, there aren't as many visits happening, right? And so
Yeah.
just whenever you think of it, and just being heartfelt, I love you. Even just saying I love you. You
Mm.
don't even have to relate it to the grief, right? Just,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
love you. I miss you. I'm wondering how you are. I'm thinking of you often. And also, just as like a permission slip for everybody, you're never gonna, like, a lot of people hold back because they don't want to like remind people, a grieving person, of how sad they are or of the loss. But I promise you that that person is always aware of that loss. It is a
True.
gaping absence in their life.
Yeah.
And the more it can be acknowledged, the more permission they have to allow themselves to be seen, to acknowledge this, that it is a huge loss, that there is this absence, and they feel so much gratitude to have that absence acknowledged and to feel held in that experience. So don't not say anything because you're afraid to remind them that their loved one that is no longer physically present is always on their mind, always in their heart. And anytime they have acknowledgement that someone else is missing them, that someone else is thinking of you being, the one without this person in their life, it's just such validation. It's
Mm.
so nourishing in such a deep way. And yeah, just simple things. I love you. I'm thinking of you. I miss you. I wonder about you. Or saying, I miss your loved one. And using their name too, I think, is another thing. Is that oftentimes people can shy away from talking about that person, from saying the
Yes.
name. And that is a really great way to acknowledge someone's grief, is to use their loved one's name and just acknowledge it in that way.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for giving us these tools that just kind of start on our path, because I know um, many of us have gone through different forms of grief in the past year.
Mm.
And getting to this new year, there's usually a process of grief to go forward into
Mm-hmm.
a new space. Um, in your relationship with the cosmos and astronomy, what can you, your insight and wisdom so deep, but so what offering would you have from that perspective as this phenomenal grief guardian
Mm-hmm.
and this person that's so connected to the universe that gets such great insight? How can you kind of um, share in language form how we can approach this coming year?
Mm. Such a good question. Um, so from an astrological perspective, the astrologers of the world have been watching for 2020, waiting for 2020, and knowing it was going to be big shifts, big changes, lots of intensity. Of course, no one can understand exactly how it's going to play out, but okay, we're on the other side of it, right? We're into 2021. Of course, a lot of people are having a lot of hope for, okay, we're through the thick of it, right? And like, like, what can we expect? What's coming next? And um, first, I would say that, of course, hope is always important, right? And to lean in the direction of hope rather than fear, right? And love and expansion rather than contraction. And that always leaning in that direction and having curiosity around it all. But what we saw last year was a lot of power dynamics, power struggles, government systems, fighting to stay alive. A lot of people realizing that systems in place are not sustainable, are not serving the masses. And now we've shifted out of an earth cycle and we're into an air cycle, and air rules the intellect. And so it's been across since the 60s, the 70s, right? Everyone's talking about the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And now, on the winter solstice on December 21st, that was the start of like the true age of Aquarius astrologically. There was major events of Jupiter and Saturn making the great conjunction, which people have talked about, which what that means is Saturn and Jupiter were just holding hands in the sky, as my teacher likes to say. So they're just hanging out up there. And yeah, what they're doing is causing a lot of unrest, as we can see. We're moving into this air cycle, which rules the intellect. So lots of technology, lots of communications. It will be really interesting to see how, things change in this coming cycle. We're already seeing it play out with new technologies coming forth and such, and government systems, just systems of power. And now we're a global humanity, right? Like we're all so interconnected, and that is definitely part of the Aquarian energy, is humanity as a whole. And so, and in that process, there's been so much grief, right? So much loss, whether it be in the actual physical death of loved ones, but also, loss of freedoms, loss of dreams, loss of jobs, loss of lifestyles, loss of homes. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? So much grief, so much loss. But also what I saw was a great opportunity to really have the space to truly grieve, right? Is that we're a culture, we're a society that's so busy and constantly going. It's easy to not stop and slow down and give ourselves that pause to grieve. And all of us collectively had this great opportunity to pause. And a lot of us probably did feel all this grief that wasn't acknowledged, wasn't processed, right? So many emotions, so much intensity, being in tight spaces with loved ones, being out of our routines, like just, again, the list goes on and on and on. But again, just the answer is always grace and compassion and softness, right? How can we come back to that space of loving ourselves, of loving others? How can we create those sanctuaries of bubbles of time within our little microcosm to just take some deep breaths, to orient ourselves, to notice what's around us, to get outside and breathe in fresh air and look up at the sky, right? Even if we're in an apartment building in New York City, you can still step outside and look up and take a breath of air, right? Yeah. And just, again, elements, connecting to the elements. What are you feeling you needed? Are you feeling stagnant, really earthy and watery and sad? Get some fire, do some jumping jacks, just whatever you can to really stoke that in you. If you're feeling too fiery and you're really angry and there's lots of hot emotions, take some deep breaths, slow it down, take a bath, just coming back to the elements. And that is what astrology is all about too. Just bringing it first full circle is, astrology is such a gift and a tool to understand our inherent gifts and where our challenges lie, right? And that this is who we are uniquely, and how can we embrace that and love that about ourselves and others. And that's what I love astrology for, is ultimately to just give each of us permission slips to be who we are and to know what we have to work to cultivate a little bit more, if that is not an innate gift, if it's not easy to get up and get our bodies moving, we know we have to consciously work at it and make it a practice. And again, just grace and love. Those are the words that just keep circling back, regardless of what the question is, it's always the answer.
Thank you so much for your time. This is really extraordinary. If I had all the money and all the billboards, grace and love, everybody. Right? Grace and love. How can people connect with you? How do they find Gentle Grief Guardians? Your handle is Enchanted Birth Keeper. You have an amazing website, which I totally encourage everybody to go check out.
Thank you.
Is there any other way that people should connect with you? What do you want people to know before we sign off?
Thank you so much. Yes, it's Instagram is a great way to connect, although I'm kind of stepping back from social media, or I have been lately. So the website is definitely the best way to get in contact with me directly. And then also I really have the intention, and I'm holding it in my heart, to create just a sort of healing circle, a virtual healing
Yes.
circle, to connect people who are experiencing loss and grief, and be a grief guardian to extend that circle of connection. And that's part of the Aquarian age too, right? Or like these gifts and these tools of Zoom and Instagram Live, and how we
Yeah.
can be held by a community even though we're not in the physical realm. And all that to say, it's so important to have our local community, right? And to really access that as well. So to cultivate that for ourselves. And yeah, if we can't connect virtually, then find yourself an animal and get your grief guardian in that way.
Go get your
But
grief
thank you.
guardian.
Exactly.
Amazing. So looking forward to all the offerings you bring into the world. You're such an amazing body wisdom teacher, earth teacher, such a medicine woman. So grateful to share space with you today. I love you so much.
Likewise, I love you so much. Thank you for creating this space for this to be shared. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, it's it's what I'm grateful for with technology right now, right?
Absolutely. We got to take the gifts, right?
Yeah,
The gifts
totally.
and the
I'm
blessings.
gonna go breathe in some starlight now. I love you so much.
Yes. Yes. I love you too. Mwah.
Okay, goodbye, my dear.
Bye.
Bye.